Welcome to Liberty and Justice with your host, Matt Whitaker.
Thanks for joining me. I'm joined today by General Keith Kellogg, a man that needs no introduction, long distinguished career in the Army and then served in the Trump administration White House on National Security Council, advised the President and the Vice President on important issues. General Kellogg, thanks for joining me.
Matt, good to be with you today.
Yeah, we talk every once in a while. I'm a big fan, a big admirer of yours. I respect just the living daylights out of you, and I loved your book that talked about your career of service. But the reason I wanted to have you on today is I want anybody listening today on CPAC Now to understand what's going on with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So could you, explain to me how you see it, and then I got a bunch of specific questions if you got the time.
Yeah, sure, Matt. Well, I won't insult the audience by doing what Vice President Harris did, which was a pretty insulting way of explaining what was happening. It was like a third-grade explanation. What we're looking at is Putin has always expressed a concern that Ukraine was too close for comfort, meaning he thought it was a security issue to him. And he didn't want Ukraine merging in with NATO or any movement to the West at all. But he's always said that. That is something he's been saying for the last 5, 6, 7 years. So when he didn't get those concerns, he basically invaded the country. I think a couple things happened during his route to an invasion. I think he hugely underestimated the Ukrainian will to fight and to stay independent, and he greatly underestimated their President Zelensky. And he's become a real rallying cry to the Western world. You know, he was one of the guys when he said, when you invade, you will see my face, not my back. And he's kept true to his word. And I think he was also Putin was unaware of basically not understanding the resolve of the West. That's always been one of his fatal flaws. We've known that for years, even when we were in the White House. We always knew that Putin had a problem. His problem was understanding the West. When he was a KGB officer, the furthest west he went was to Dresden, Germany. So he never had a real assignment overseas to really understand how the West worked and what they thought. So he bought into a couple big mistakes there. Frankly, he violated rule number 1 that I've always believed, which actually goes back to a Chinese military philosopher named Sun Tzu, where he said, if you understand yourself and understand your enemy, you will win all your battles. If you understand yourself and and not the enemy, you'll win 50% of them. If you don't understand yourself and you don't understand the enemy, you'll lose all your fights. He's in the lower 1/3 category. He's made a big mistake. Today, Matt, even though you see the inexorable advance of the Russian forces because of sheer mass, and it's 8 to 10 to 1, Russia compared to Ukraine, he is in fact losing. Because every day that goes by that he has not taken Kyiv, the capital city of Ukraine, or decapitated the government, defined as eliminating the government and putting somebody that he likes as in charge, every day that goes by, he loses. He loses in the court of world opinion. We all see that. He loses when the Allies get much stronger, which we're seeing that. And so he's not gaining any ground at all. He may win this fight long term, but I think he's bitten off more than he can chew. And I think what you're looking at, if I would pick up the phone and call him, I said, look, here's what you need to understand. Don't want an answer from you now. But Vlad, here's my recommendation to you. Go back and look what happened to Afghanistan and the Soviet Union. Yeah. This is going to be your Afghanistan. Now, you can do what you want to do, fine. But I think this is one of those efforts that Ukraine will be the thorn in the burr under a saddle, and he's going to pay a long-term price.
Yeah, watching this play out on television and social media, I think one of the things that I wasn't surprised by, but to your point of the not understanding himself and his military, is how behind the times it appears the Russian military is. They may have 200,000 or so fighters, but their equipment looks very Soviet era almost. What are you seeing as you see these images?
Wait, here's what's stunning, Matt. They've gone through a 10-year modernization plan. I mean, that's the reason all of us who had had military backgrounds thought this would be, he'd be in Kyiv in 3 or 4 days. Surround the city, pound it, and keep moving on. He hasn't done that. So all his modernization may have been in equipment, but it sure wasn't on how he fights. And, you can have the best equipment in the world, but if you don't know how to fight, you've got a real problem. I used to tell people that from the first Gulf War, I said, if we had taken all of our equipment, which was the best in the world, and given it to the Iraqis, and we had taken all of their equipment, we still would have beaten them, because we fought differently. Our leadership taught us how to fight well. We were conditioned how to fight well. We trained how to fight well, and we executed well. Their method of command and control and leadership is in fact Soviet. Their equipment may be modern, but their leadership's not, and that's causing them enormous problems. And frankly, we're picking up on it because they've actually had to resort to unclassified or open discussions on their radios because their real secure system is broken down. So we're seeing the confusion they've got in their ranks.
Yeah, and one of the other things I read is, speaking of the training, is that the West has been training the Ukrainian military like 5 divisions a year over the last several years since Ukraine determined that a Russian invasion could be in the works.
Yeah, well, not only we train them, though, what you can't ignore is the fighting spirit. I've told people, and my wife was reminding me that she's getting a little bit old hearing it, but it's an old Napoleonic axiom that the moral to the physical is 3 is to 1, which meant, even Napoleon understood this, that you can't ever discount the will and the fighting spirit of an army. And that's what he meant. Fighting spirit really counts. And I'll tell you, Matt, the Ukrainians are really showing that. They're showing a spirit of fighting and unusual tactics. And I think it's really confounding the Russians. And I think, as I said today, if this was a fight, a prize fight, and we were in, say, round 7 right now, Russia's behind on points. Yeah. It's pretty clear. Ukraine's winning the fight. It may be close, but the problem I've got right now is, over time, just the sheer size of the Russian military mass will eventually take over. But here's what's going to be really interesting to me, and I've said this all along. I said he does not have the distance or the legs, the capacity to take all of Ukraine. That's being proven out. If you look at it, he has now committed almost 100% of his invasion force. He's nowhere near the Dnieper River, and crossing over the Dnieper River to get to the west. He's nowhere there. He's overextended, and it's showing the real gaps in his army. First of all, he's really emboldened NATO, because NATO's now going, we're afraid of this guy?
Right.
And I think even President Xi is probably saying the same thing. Well, I'm not too worried about this guy. This guy, maybe I'd made this handshake deal too early.
Yeah, well, I always, I didn't think that the Russians could project power much past their borders, and to your point, that's playing out before our eyes. But, one of the other interesting things I've been reading about and paying attention to is not only the regular Ukrainian army, but this irregular army, where it appears anybody that's physically able to is picking up arms and defending their countries, kind of like you would expect to see if the United States was ever invaded. But I guess the thing I really want to understand is from a military commander standpoint, and from your viewpoint, how do you command this irregular army of volunteers and sort of ordinary citizens that may or may not be armed? I noticed one picture had a guy with a wooden gun waiting for his issue to come through. But how do you command an irregular army together with a regular army?
Well, they merge them, and I think that's what the Ukrainian military is doing. Is the quasi-military, the military, they're bringing them into their organizations. It's sort of like, okay, we bring 10 people in and tell the number one guy, the tallest guy there, okay, you're the squad leader, and the rest of you follow me, and you put one soldier with him, and you go out and you kind of do good. I am sure there's ways that they're doing this, and that's the way we would do it. It's sort of like our National Guard concept, or the leader-to-lead concept, where all you take is 1 or 2 soldiers, and you sort of follow me, and this is what we'll do. And Putin's turned the whole nation against him. Yeah. I mean, he cannot. There's no way that I can see Russia occupying this nation. They don't have the garrison force to do it, and they're going to pay a terrible price. Here, Matt. Here's what's really interesting to me, though, is the one thing that I'm confused about. I've got the military efforts going on. I've got the resupply of equipment to Ukraine. I've got NATO. reinforcing all the nations. You know what I don't see? I don't see the diplomacy, Pete. I don't see any diplomatic efforts. Now, part of that, I think, is because Biden has got no credibility with Putin, and Putin, of course, has no credibility with Biden.
Right.
I mean, they don't like each other. It's clear. But Biden is basically written off talking to Putin. He can say all he wants to, that I want to talk to Putin, he won't. So I heard today or read about it, that it looks like Macron of France and Scholz of Germany are talking with Xi. That's what you may see. And I think what you may see long term, because of that, you're going to see a European alliance that doesn't rely on the United States diplomatically. So Biden can say, well, we're leading the West. Well, we're leading the West by following them. And I think you're going to see that because Putin is not talking to the U.S. He's talking to everybody but the U.S. Long term, people need to understand, I know where this is going. We've got no credibility with the Russians.
Is there, and so in your mind, where we, for example, on Nord Stream or some of these other energy sanctions, waited for the Germans to come along, the Biden administration are they happy to be taking a backseat to France and Germany? Or is this some, jujitsu diplomacy? I never want to give the Biden administration much credit, but what could just nobody trusts or believes them is what you're telling me.
Yeah, I think they realize that it's what do they say in Texas? All hat, no cattle. I think that's what they're looking at Biden, but here the Europeans again are I had hope when Scholz of Germany said they're going to resurrect their army and go up to 2% GDP spent on defense. I was fine with that until today. He said, well, we're not going to cut any energy imports. He just undercut himself. Because that's what's the way you get to Russia is you attack them economically. Okay, and that the biggest one is energy. I had always thought, it depends on what number you use. I can give you 3 different numbers from 3 different sources. Bottom line is between 40 and 60% of Germany's energy comes from Russia. Well, they need to go cold turkey. Well, they're not going to do that. Scholz said he wasn't. Well, then if you're going to continue to draw their energy, you're going to continue to pay them. You've kind of undercut your case. And everybody says, well, NATO, we're tough. This is going to be an interesting game to watch play out. And that's the reason I said about the diplomatic piece, because sooner or later wars end. They always do. Mm-hmm. The question is, how do you end it? And I don't even think we're thinking that. I just don't get the feeling we're being creative. I don't think we're pushing back on Putin. And I don't have a good answer for you, Matt. But I think what I would do, I'd probably grab my smartest people and move them over to the executive office building, next to the West Wing of the White House, and take them up on the 5th floor of the EOB and give them a whole lot of really warm beer and cold pizza, and said, you guys come up with good solutions and let's figure what the solutions are and go forward. I don't think we're doing that. I think we are entirely reactive to what's happening.
Yeah, and Germany has done this to themselves, General, because they canceled, as soon as Trump left office, they canceled the 2 liquid natural gas terminals that they were going to construct to import U.S. LNG. And I believe they've been taking offline their nuclear power plants since Fukushima happened. And so now their dependence on natural gas from Russia to power their energy is, like you said, somewhere between 40 and 60%, with no plan to wean themselves off of Russian gas.
Yeah, there's not. And I read this morning that it looks like the nuclear power plants, and most of them are in Baden-Württemberg and actually in the Munich area, that they've decided they're talking now about at least extending their life for another 3 years, and because they realize they've got an energy issue. But that's, by the way, that's the reason why the French aren't worried. The French is a nuclear nation. Basically, it does all its energy from nuclear, and I think they now stay dependent on Russia, and I think when this is all said and done, they're going to continue to stay dependent on Russia, and that's going to put us back in this really interesting predicament of, okay, Germany, if you're going to continue to take all of that fuel from Germany, where do you really stand? Because people said, well, we've shut down the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Doesn't make any difference. The Nord Stream 1 pipeline is still open.
Yep.
The Atlantic pipeline is still open. All those pipelines going across Europe, not one of them has been shut down.
What do you see as the most? I mean, what are the possible outcomes of this conflict, and what's the most likely outcome?
Well, the possible or probable outcome is, I think you see we used to have an East and West Germany. You have an East and West Ukraine. I think that's the worst case, because I don't think Putin can continue this fight into the West out there. He starts to butt the NATO countries, which is a violation of exactly what he said he wanted, which was to have some buffer. That's what I would say his best case and our worst case. Our best case and his worst case is that Ukraine actually continues to survive, and he sees his military being basically humiliated in the world, and people say pull back. But I think there's going to be constant conflict, because I don't think he's willing to give up on the autonomous zones on the east. I don't think he's willing to give up Crimea. And I think if they went to Zelensky and said this thing's over, if you recognize both of those, I don't think Zelensky will do it. I think Zelensky has reached the point where he says, I ain't giving in anything to this guy. So that's where somebody is going to have to broker this diplomatically and turn it either over to the EU or the UN or somebody, because neither side's going to give. I don't think Zelensky, as long as he stays alive, is going to give 1 inch to Putin. And Putin is too stubborn, because he doesn't understand Zelensky, to do the same. So I think you're heading for a real stalemate intellectually and diplomatically.
And so, do you see? I mean, if I'm a Russian with any kind of historical knowledge, you don't have to look very far back to their invasion of Afghanistan and ultimately their humiliation at the hands of shoulder-fired rockets, supplied nominally, I guess, arguably by the United States. And it seems like that's exactly what's going to happen here in the Ukraine. At worst, a guerrilla war, but most likely a continued conflict with these, tank and surface-to-air shoulder-fired missiles.
Yeah, that's really, it's sort of like Putin's got himself in a briar patch, and he's going to have to figure out how to extract himself. And Zelensky's not going to give him an easy way out. Zelensky's going to keep throwing, him back into the briar patch, even if he may try to get out, because Zelensky won't give up any territory. And he's refused to over the years during the Minsk process, when they tried to do some type of solving the problem with the two breakaway republics on the east. So Putin's going to have to try to figure this one out to try to save face. And the only thing he's going to try to do, I believe, is continue the advance to finally take Kyiv, finally take the eastern part. But Matt, you've been, you've seen in the White House and how to do it. And man, if I was Biden, I would have called in my CIA directorate. I would have issued a presidential finding the first day, and that finding is to use all this covert and clandestine capability to train Ukrainians to go against the Russians. And that's what I said about going back to Afghanistan, because that's what we did in Afghanistan. I would make life a living hell for Putin.
Well, he's got to be certainly unhappy with what's happening and the progress, and maybe he's deluded enough to think that he can just continue to press the force, because you said the numbers are just in his favor. But what do you think is next? If we are in kind of this standoff and a war of wills, at some point in time, doesn't Putin risk a threat from inside Russia?
Yeah, that's what you said. What's his long-term concern? Today, if I was Putin, I'd double up my bodyguards. Because either the oligarch's going to get him or the military's going to get him, or something's going to happen. Because if he can't produce this, and Russia has become a pariah state. I mean, Putin's beyond being a pariah. Mm-hmm. He's actually reaching a point that he's actually, just not only just a thug, but this is a guy who can be brought up on war crimes. But his military is going to say, God, we're looking stupid, we're looking bad, and we're becoming a pariah nation and being embarrassed by everybody, and that's going to be hard to forget. I mean, I will tell you, if the war stopped today, and I know people in the military, everybody is saying across the board, those guys aren't very good, and you don't want to have that in your reputation as a military when they start equating your military to the Vermont National Guard, and it's probably an insult to the Vermont National Guard.
Yeah. One final question. I know we've got limited time here, but one final question. I've noticed that Russia has lost a couple field generals in this last 2 weeks. I mean, how devastating is that for an army that needs, that type of leadership on the field?
Well, I say one thing. I say tongue in cheek. It's always good for morale to lose a general, because because the soldiers say, well, they're out there with us. They've lost a couple, according to their reporting. The biggest one they lost to me was the general that commanded their 7th Airborne, and he was a top flight general. And a backhanded compliment to him, he was out where he was supposed to be, which was with his troops near the front. But what that's telling me is the Ukrainian targeting is pretty good, and they're going after their senior officials, senior officers, and losing generals like that is never good. We lost, I think, 6 in Vietnam total, but it's never good to lose a general, because that kind of tells you that the enemy's taking the fight to you.
Yeah. Well, General Keith Kellogg, thank you for again taking the time to help me understand some of these issues. Everyone that follows CPAC now and follows my show, Liberty and Justice, is learns something every time they listen to you. So I very much appreciate your time, and we'll do this again soon.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
All right, General. Thank you.